It wasn't pretty early, and in fact, it wasn't pretty late as BYU snapped a 4-game slide with an important victory over the Baylor Bears, but it appears they have found the spark that can propel them down the stretch.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insider, your host here on the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day, and thank you for making all of us fine folks over at Locked On, the #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we're going to react to BYU's 99-94 win over the Baylor Bears and why I believe it could be the spark a la West Virginia a season ago that can get BYU rolling down the stretch here. Then we're going to talk individually about AJ Dybantsa. I continue to see people out there downgrading and essentially saying that he's not as good as everybody wants to think he is when it comes to the NBA draft, et cetera. And I think they're absolutely dead wrong. We'll dig into that. And we'll talk about two superstars for BYU football to wrap up today's show. Both Bear Bachmeier and LJ Martin being mentioned on some early Heisman Trophy lists, but nowhere near where I think they should be on said list. And we'll get to all that on today's show. And it's all brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The winter games are on. There's no better way to follow them than with a bet on FanDuel. Of course, where FanDuel like to say, you can play your game. All right, if you missed it last night for whatever reason, BYU notched an all-important victory, 99-94 over the Baylor Bears, snapping a 4-game losing streak. But I saw shades of what happened a season ago when BYU threw everything they had at the West Virginia Mountaineers in a game that they absolutely had to have that really propelled them to what ended up being a 9-game win streak down the stretch of last season. What I saw from Baylor last night was very similar shades of that game in the sense that BYU had their backs against the wall. Much like they were a year ago when they went to West Virginia, BYU had lost 2 straight games at that point, losing to Cincinnati. I think before that might have been, was it Arizona? I have to look, let me double check here. It was, so they'd lost last season going into that game. Yeah, they'd lost against Arizona and then lost at Cincinnati, and going to West Virginia, things were not looking great for BYU. They were 6-6 in the Big 12, kind of middling. Does that sound very familiar to what happened already this season for BYU men's basketball, who are 5-5 going into last night's game against the Baylor Bears? And BYU found themselves down early in this game against West Virginia, and then rallied behind guys like Mihailo Boskovic, Trey Stewart, and it really set in motion BYU starting to generate momentum, which propelled them to an incredible run down the stretch. And obviously it ended up in a Sweet 16 berth a season ago. I believe what we saw from BYU against Baylor can have that same type of impact for the BYU basketball program, but it will be a thing that the BYU players themselves will ultimately determine if they're going to capture the same type of momentum, that snowball rolling down the hill type momentum that they garnered last year with an energizing win on the road over a team that you were expected to beat but found yourself struggling against. Last night, BYU down 12 at one point in the first half. Then they raced to a 17-point lead in the second half, and look at it, they have the thing on cruise control, and only to let the Baylor Bears grind their way back into this game. And like I said, there's so many different parallels to what happened between this West Virginia game and Baylor last night. And the hope is the way that BYU finished that game, while they had to fend off a furious rally from the Baylor Bears, I think they can take momentum out of this game and understand that, yes, we still have deficiencies. BYU gave up 94 points. Their defense, no, it's not fixed. And in fact, it's as broken as it ever was. But there was a want-to factor that we saw against this Baylor Bears squad, much like we saw against West Virginia a season ago, that is going to, I think, overcome some of the more glaring issues this basketball program has. The difference between last year and this year is we know how last year played out. Obviously, a 9-game win streak, had a phenomenal run in March Madness, but the hype for last season versus this season are completely different. BYU is expected this year to be among the cream of the crop in the Big 12 conference. And going into last night's game, in fact, they were nowhere near the top of the conference. In fact, they were mired in that mushy middle, as a lot of people like to call it, of the Big 12 conference. But now is the time. If you are going to capture the momentum, become the team that everybody expects you to be, AJ Dybantsa, Richie Saunders, Robert Wright III, Kevin Young, and everybody else involved in the cast of characters of the BYU basketball program, they have to seize that moment now and make sure that they are doing their absolute darndest to go out there and play stellar basketball down the stretch. They will have an opportunity to make a 2-game streak in terms of wins back-to-back when they host Colorado on Saturday afternoon. Obviously going to be celebrating Jimmer Fredette with them retiring his jersey and hanging it in the rafters of the Marriott Center. That's obviously going to add some extra juice to this game. But Colorado's a down program. You should be able to pick up that win and start, like I said, start to garner some of that momentum as you roll forward here. The following week, though, is going to be the real litmus test. You go to Arizona a week from today, and then you're home to number 5 Iowa State. Now, Iowa State lost last night in upset fashion to TCU, so that ranking will also change, as well as Arizona's ranking by virtue of their loss in Lawrence to Kansas. But everything is still there for BYU basketball to play for. And they, I think, guys like Richie Saunders, who were on last year's squad, Mihailo Boskovic, Keba Keita, they can say to guys like AJ Dybantsa and to Robert Wright and say, guys, what we experienced at Baylor is exactly what happened to us at West Virginia last year. And in fact, we already heard in the aftermath of the Houston game that AJ has heard from Richie about the struggles BYU went through a season ago. The hope is that the lessons they learned in that Baylor win, as ugly as it may have been, it was a win. That's important considering they were on a 4-game slide going into it. They can, like I said, learn from that and understand, okay, 1's out of the way. Let's make it 2. Let's, as Kevin Young starts to say, start stacking days. And obviously, in addition to that, start stacking wins. BYU's schedule is not easy. As I mentioned, next week is going to be absolutely a big test. And then you also still looming out there. You have the back-to-back road trip of West Virginia and Cincinnati. And oh, by the way, your regular season finale is against the Texas Tech Red Raiders, who are nationally ranked themselves. There are some really tough games on the docket for BYU down the stretch here. But that is where you have to start to pick up momentum. And let's also remind you that last year in that stretch run, BYU had wins over number 23 Kansas, number 19 Arizona, at number 10 Iowa State, and then obviously beating Iowa State once again to finish up. That was in the Big 12 tournament. So it's not that BYU had an easy schedule last year. They had some toughies on that schedule as well. The Big 12 is better this year than it was a season ago, but there's a lot of parallels between these two, and the hope is that we can see a stretch run here in 2026, much like we saw in 2025. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about AJ Dybantsa. What in the world are people still trying to do downgrading this kid and what he is accomplishing on the court? Because quite frankly, I think they're making themselves look like fools. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. Hiring is not just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move for you. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, skills, certifications, location, whatever it may be. They will find it for you guys. And obviously, if I were hiring, I wouldn't just want to find somebody who can help. I want someone with real experience who can jump right in and be an asset to my company. That's why I want you guys to check out about Indeed. You can get specific and target exactly what you need. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I have been talking to you about this, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes, and do it with Indeed sponsored jobs. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Of course, the winter games are officially here. And if you're anything like me, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. Not going to lie. Every 4 years, I get sucked into curling. I don't know what it is about this sport, but I absolutely love it. And that's why following the winter games and a myriad of other sports in those winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts, individual events, to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Obviously, a lot of you are figure skating fans out there. Probably some of you are looking at the half pipe events, both in freestyle skiing or snowboarding. Whatever it is, FanDuel has got the entire Olympic experience in keeping it engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than to do it with our friends over at FanDuel, where they like to say, of course, at FanDuel, you can play your game. Thank you for being here on Locked On Cougars. And as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Share it with your family and friends, and continue to, if you want to take it to the next level, if you are what we call an everydayer, you're watching the show, interacting with myself and others on the channel, join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. It's a great way to interact with the show, get extra perks like ad-free audio episodes, access to our members-only Discord server. Those of you who are in the Discord channel, I have made a renewed commitment. I'm going to be in there more active and start talking with y'all in there. So get in there. It kind of feels like what Twitter used to be. There's a myriad of other options. You can do it all by joining us on the Everydayer Club. LockedOnCougars.supercast.com. That's LockedOnCougars.supercast.com. All right. For the life of me, I do not get what NBA draft heads, I'm using the term loosely, have against AJ Dybantsa. There, for some reason, seems to be a prevailing notion on social media, for these, I call them draft nicks, draft heads, guys who want to think that they know what it takes to succeed when it comes to the NBA. And for some reason, some of them seem to have a vendetta against BYU's young superstar freshman. And like I said, it baffles me to no end. We are watching one of the seminal talents, at least in the last 5 to 6 years in terms of the NBA draft, playing out before our very eyes if you're a BYU fan. If you're lucky enough to have gone to the Marriott Center or been where BYU's played on the road this season, you have watched a guy that, in my opinion, at worst, is a top 3 pick in next year's NBA draft. And if I had to pick today, personal opinion on the matter, if I had to make the number 1 pick in the NBA draft, I don't care what franchise it is, whether it's my beloved Utah Jazz or otherwise, I am picking AJ Dybantsa. And the reason why, I believe he's got the most upside on both sides of the basketball. Yes, Darren Peterson is an absolute seminal talent in his own right. He's played 13 games this year. He's going to fit right in with the load management style of the NBA, and that's not a compliment. Maybe very blunt about that. Cam Boozer is an incredibly talented offensive player, but much like his old man, Carlos, he's a bit of a sieve on defense. He's got the same body type, and while he scores, he gives up almost just as much on the defensive end of the court. That is why I believe that AJ Dybantsa has the most upside of any of the top draft picks in this NBA draft, and I'm telling you, it's a draft chock full of talent. Koa Pete, what you saw last night from Yesufu, Tunde Yesufu, there are freshmen littered across the Big 12 who are going to be first round, if not top 10 draft picks. And we're lucky to watch them all play out. And I've been lucky enough to have a seat in the Marriott Center on Media Row watching a lot of this talent play. But AJ, for the life of me, I do not get the criticism. Some people are questioning his motor. Some of them are questioning his perimeter shooting. You want real hard and fast stats of what he accomplished? Well, he has done something that no other player has done in the past 3 decades. Last night, there was only one Division I or NBA player who has had a game where he, and this is according to Opta Stats, has scored 35-plus points, grabbed 5-plus rebounds, dished out 5-plus assists, shot 70% from the floor, had only 1 turnover or none, and played the entire game as AJ played 40 minutes against the Baylor Bears. And that one player, I'm not going to bury the lead. It's AJ Dybantsa. He is absolutely electric. He is everything that I think anybody who, when he arrived at BYU, could have hoped he was going to be. He's been just that. Has the winning at the highest level accompanied that with BYU? No, not to this point, but there is still time for that to happen for BYU basketball. But it does not take anything away from what AJ has accomplished in Big 12 play. His stats in Big 12 play alone right now, he's averaging a shade under 27 points per game, just over 5 rebounds per game, 3.5 assists, and he's shooting 51, 40, and 73. So 51% from the field. That's incredible. 40% from 3 and 73% from the free throw line. If you want to quibble with the free throw percentage, go right on ahead, but he's doing it himself. We asked him in the aftermath of the Houston game. He said, I missed 5 of my own. There's no excuse for that. This is a kid who is harder on himself, I think, than almost anybody out there. And if you missed the Deep Blue feature that BYU TV did on him this past week, I think it's a week ago, they did it. His parents, they've got a really firm hand on their son and making sure he's not getting a big head. And AJ's never really struck me as a guy who is going to play like he's got too big of a head for the game and the team that he's playing for. He has fit in phenomenally well with BYU, I feel like. I think based on body language, he and his teammates get along very, very well. It was really cool to hear him talk about last night how, yeah, he had an incredible performance, like a seminal performance, one that hasn't happened in 3+ decades, if at all ever. And he says, you know what my mindset was? I wanted to get down here to Baylor and get a win for Rob. Speaking of Rob Wright. That kind of tells me everything I need to know about AJ. He is more about making the right play. And I'm not trying to compare these two because I'm telling you, one's one of the all-timers, maybe 1A to 1B in terms of Michael Jordan. But LeBron James reminds me a lot of what AJ Dybantsa has in his game. And what I mean by that is LeBron is a guy who has always been willing his entire career to make winning plays when needed, but also willing to dish the ball to teammates that also can make the winning plays. Has it failed him at times? Yes, it has. There have been some famous moments that LeBron probably should have held onto the ball, but he saw a play to be made and he tried to make it and reward a teammate, and it didn't work out. I see those same shades in what I see from AJ Dybantsa. And I think that anybody who's trying to downgrade him and trying to say that he's not as good as everybody wants to say he is, I don't know where you're getting it from. I'm absolutely floored that that would be your mindset about a young man of this caliber. He's got all the offensive potential in the world. He absolutely gets after it on defense. Is he a perfect defensive player? No, he is not. And I don't think anybody really is at this point in his life, but there are a lot of positive signs. It's phenomenal that he is all of 6'9", 6'10". He handles the ball like a guard. He is able to score at all three levels on the court. As I mentioned, he puts an effort on the defensive end of the court. That was really on display against the Baylor Bears, in addition to the rest of his teammates, and helping BYU find a way in this game. And as Fran Fraschilla, who I think Fran knows more about college basketball and just pro basketball and basketball in general than I'll ever know, said this last night, quote, "These draft experts better make up their mind about BYU men's basketball star AJ Dybantsa. What," and he capitalized what, "have they been missing all season year? Honestly, have they watched the guy in person?" And my response to that to Fran would be, I don't think they have, Fran. And because if they do, you see what I think all of us see in AJ Dybantsa. He has got every skill set. He has got every God-given talent that can be given to a basketball player. And there's a reason why he is going to be a very, very wealthy man in due time. And he's already pretty dang wealthy. Trust me. Having an NIL deal with Red Bull, exclusive NIL deal with Red Bull, and one with Nike, in addition to others. And oh, by the way, he's reportedly cashing a check to the tune of millions, plural, from BYU in terms of revenue share and NIL. This is a young man who is going places. But the thing about it is, I do not get for the life of me anybody who wants to poke holes in his game. Yes, I know that's what NBA talent evaluators are trying to do. They're trying to essentially, hey, I need to force myself to talk myself out of not taking AJ Dybantsa. That's what a lot of people do when it comes to the NBA draft. I would flip the whole narrative on its head, though, and say, why wouldn't you want this guy on your team? I don't know. And like I said, I do not for the life of me understand why certain people find such joy in trying to tear down and, like I said, pull down this kid and say he's not as good as we think he is. Because I, personal bias right here out in the open, I would take him with the number one pick in the NBA draft. I think is that good. I think his potential is that great. And I do think he is going to be an absolutely incredibly talent. He's going to be an incredibly successful and talented player at the NBA level because he's already showing it at the highest levels of college basketball. All right. From one superstar to two guys who I think are absolute superstars in their own right. But for the life of me, much like AJ, they're not getting the same love. Why is that? Well, I'm going to try and make heads and tails of that next.
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Dawn Staley and South Carolina remain on top of the SEC standings after handing Tennessee their worst defeat in program history with a final score of 93-40. In the 43-point win, South Carolina shot 69% from the field. Tessa Johnson had a perfect shooting night, scoring 24 points, shooting 4 for 4 from the floor, including 2 threes, and made all 4 of her free throws. And UCLA remains undefeated in Big Ten play, topping Michigan 69-66 as Player of the Year contender Lauren Betts put up a double-double, scoring 16 points, collecting 16 rebounds, and adding 5 assists and 3 blocks. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts the same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Thank you for being here on Locked On Cougars. As always, hope you're having a fantastic day, and thank you for making it your first listen of the day and or view if you're watching this on YouTube. However you consume the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review, and if you don't mind, share it with a family member or a friend who may be a BYU fan just like yourself and wants more BYU-centric content available every single day. All right, so I was reading an article. It was a way too early list because we love lists when it comes to college football and college sports in general. On ESPN, it's called the Way Too Early Look at the 2026 Heisman Trophy Race. And obviously, there are the top dogs that you mentioned there. Jeremiah Smith's on this list, Julian Sayin, the quarterback from Ohio State, Dante Moore at Oregon, Gunnar Stockton from Georgia. Like, there's top talent, Malachi Tony from Miami. Brendan Sorsby, the high-priced addition for the Texas Tech Red Raiders, he makes an appearance on this list. And I kept rolling through this. Darian Mensah, Miami, okay. Trinidad Chambliss, Ole Miss, if he's eligible to play next year. Going down this list saying, okay, some good players here. The longer I got into this list, Drew Mestemaker from Oklahoma State, obviously a guy who jumping up from the G6 ranks at North Texas to join as head coach at Oklahoma State, the BYU, they'll see Mestemaker this coming season. CJ Carr from Notre Dame, BYU will play Notre Dame at home in mid-October. I got further and further down this list, and then we get finally down to the final stanza of this article. It says, others to watch. Mentioned Sam Levitt at LSU, John Mateer, quarterback at Oklahoma, Cam Coleman from Texas, Josh Hoover from Indiana, Nate Frazier, a running back from Georgia, and then finally, LJ Martin, running back BYU, Bear Bachmeier, quarterback BYU. I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, well, that's cool that at least they're mentioned in this article, but at the same time, I am thinking, why are they not getting more love? Bear Bachmeier appears to be poised, I think, to make major leaps and bounds this offseason as a member of the BYU football program full-time for the first full year in Provo. Mind you, this kid, speaking of Bear, and I'm not trying to use the term kid to downgrade him, but he's a young man who came to BYU in mid-June, had about 5, maybe 6 weeks to learn the playbook, then goes out in training camp, wins the starting job, and oh, by the way, as a true freshman quarterback, leads BYU to an incredible 12-2 record. 3,500 total yards, showed every bit the skill set you wanted to see from him. And as I mentioned, he showed up at BYU in mid-June. He was there for months, weeks before the season began, and he accomplished that. Now with 9+ months of training, spring ball, summer workouts, all the different things that go into making college football players as good as they can be, why in the world would a guy like Bear Bachmeier not be higher on this list? I don't know. And I wish I had a way to get in contact with the authors and say, what's going on here? And it may just simply point to the fact that the Big 12 is not perceived to be as good as the Big 10 or the SEC nationally. But as I mentioned, Brendan Sorsby is pretty high on that list in terms of the players they mentioned there. And they had a little blurb about him and what he expects to accomplish as Texas Tech looks to repeat as Big 12 champions. But I'm telling you, Bear Bachmeier deserves to be higher on this list. And then also, I look at it, I guess, real quick on the Bear Bachmeier before we move on. The other thing on Bear Bachmeier is this is a kid who has got incredible poise. He's unflappable for some injury concerns. That kid, I think, balled out time and time again and really just showed a really calm demeanor in the face of what some pretty incredible pressure could have really messed with him. But all he did was go out there and make plays. And that's going to serve him well throughout the entirety of his college career. But also, it's something that I think the Heisman Trophy voters, if they were to, pay attention to little old BYU over here, they would notice that about him and say, man, maybe we need to pay a little more attention to Bear Bachmeier. Now, the other player on that list is the reigning offensive player of the year in the Big 12 Conference, and that is LJ Martin. And in this day and age of football, I understand that running backs, they are at a disadvantage in terms of trying to go out there and get extra love when it comes to the Heisman Trophy. You have to have an incredible season as a running back in this day and age to win the Heisman. And LJ just had a 1,300-yard season, missed time in this past season, and has an outside shot. I don't say an outside shot, actually a pretty decent shot, hitting over 1,300 yards. He's 1,347 yards away from being BYU's all-time leading rusher. Let's say he goes out and has a season for the ages. Let's say he goes north of 1,500 yards, proves once again to be that bell cow star running back that BYU essentially centers their offense on, and once again just shines in the Big 12 Conference. Will that be enough for him to win a Heisman Trophy? I don't know that it will. Nice shiny win on home turf over a number 5 plus or better ranked Notre Dame squad. That would be a phenomenal showing for him. The biggest thing I think for a guy like LJ is that BYU is going to have to run the table next year for him to get the pub. And quite frankly, it probably is a similar type of circumstance for Bear Bachmeier. The nice part is BYU's proven to be a team that can make that type of run. Now, obviously, the past 2 years, 11-2 in 2024, 12-2 in 2025, have had losses on the docket. But those two teams appear to be setting up what I think could be a historic year this year for the BYU football program. And if they take advantage of the schedule that's before them, it does have some toughies on it, but not necessarily it's a murderer's row, to use that expression in terms of their schedule. There's no reason to think that both Bear and LJ Martin aren't capable of garnering extra Heisman Trophy buzz. So while I am appreciative to ESPN for even mentioning them on the list, I would have hoped that they were higher up on this list, because I think there are players, if you were to say, okay, Jake, you can have Bear Bachmeier or Drew Mestemaker, I would say I'd want Bear Bachmeier. And that's something against Drew Mestemaker. He was absolutely phenomenal for North Texas, but he is making the leap up from North Texas, who is a member of the American Conference, and coming to the Big 12. Will that transition play out? Bo Jackson at Ohio State, he had 1,090 rushing yards and 7 total touchdowns. Became the 5th true freshman in OSU history to have a 1,000-yard season. That's impressive, but I still think Bear Bachmeier and or LJ Martin are better than that. Jaden Mayava from USC. Obviously, USC is going to garner eyeballs because, it is USC. But I look at this list, and I believe that there are guys on that list that BYU is got studs in their own right that I would take readily over these other players. And I like I said, I appreciate the fact that they're even on the list. That is an accomplishment in and of itself. But I do think that these two players, they do deserve some extra pub. And I'm just going to call on BYU, if they want to generate said pub, start the campaign now. Start to put stories out about Bear. Start to put stories about LJ, because I think they have phenomenal stories in their own right. Tell the story of what Bear did last year. Remember, he enrolled at Stanford early, went through the early part of spring ball, realized this is not what I want to do, leaves, and then transfers to BYU after the semester ends. And I said, puts together an absolutely electric freshman season, leading the BYU football program. And there's no reason to think that he's not going to take the leap this offseason. Get that story out there to the national media and start to really kind of formulate this. Point out what LJ Martin accomplished last year in spite of a pretty debilitating shoulder injury. Trust me, the people I talked to about that shoulder injury were floored that he became as good as he was down the stretch, because there was some concern in the immediate aftermath of that shoulder injury against Iowa State that he may miss the entire rest of the season because it was that messed up. All he did was gut it out, shoot it up, put an extra pad on it. Because trust me, if you watched him walk off the field, the pad level was completely different in terms of the padding he was wearing under it to protect that shoulder. And all he did was go out there and ball out. These two young men deserve more Heisman Trophy love. And I said, like I said, they admit it. It's the way too early look at the Heisman Trophy race. But let's also be very blunt. These type of articles kind of set the mindset for certain people out there when it comes to setting the narrative for college football. So I would appreciate it, BYU, get out ahead of this a little bit. And that's some unsolicited advice from your resident podcast host here. But I do think that these two players, they deserve some extra love, much like guys like AJ Dybantsa for BYU basketball are getting. And it's going to require BYU to be a little more outspoken in terms of getting that story out there. And I would get it out there right now. Just do it. Get it out there. Do it during spring ball. Do it during the summer, and really help set that narrative in the positive fashion for BYU going in to this fall. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the show. Hope you guys are all doing fantastic out there. I do want to give a quick shout out to the fine folks over at Real Salt Lake. This is their brand new kit, jersey kit. Using the lingo that they sent over to me. Appreciate them. I wanted to, sport a little bit and give them some pub. I think it's an incredible new look for the franchise. So a big thank you to Real Salt Lake for sending that over. But just a reminder for you guys, as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on tomorrow's show, going to catch up with a guy that has got literally a, let's put it this way. It's a courtside seat is probably the best term to say, but he's about as vocal a supporter of BYU sports can be. You're going to get to know Ammon Montenegro on tomorrow's show, so stay tuned for that. And as always, thank you for being a part of this. Coming up, we're going to send you guys over, if you're watching this on video, to the first ever national Locked On College Football Network YouTube channel. It's a great way to catch more electric content when it comes to the Locked On Network, but also, if you're so interested, join the Everydayer Club. Locked On Cougars at supercast.com to get all the perks available to you as a true, as I call them, super fan or an Everydayer Club member right here on the podcast. And if you're listening on audio, go make your second listen now. Our friends over at Locked On College Football. So as always, thank you for your support of the podcast, and come back tomorrow and be an Everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.